So welcome back sa Political Law Review. And I might upload this video next week na. Kasi pansin nyo, yung pag-record ko ngayon sa mga later videos, hindi na siya tuloy-tuloy, parang may cut-cut. So yung ginagawa ko, pinopost process ko pa siya pagkatapos para isang buong clip lang. So, ayun, it's kinda late. And yeah, I might upload this sometime Monday or Tuesday or not later than Wednesday. I know I said that I upload on weekends, pero medyo marami rin tayong hahabulin para matapos natin yung Poly-Rev by December. Okay, so separation of powers and delegation of powers. So, ano yung separation of powers? It refers to the constitutional demarcation of the three fundamental powers of the government. The principle of separation of powers ordains that each of the three great branches of the government, so ano yung three great branches? It's the legislative, executive, and judicial department. So these three great branches of government have exclusive cognizance of and is supreme in matters falling within its own constitutionally allocated sphere. So, kung ano yung powers ng each department, lahat yan nakasulat na sa Constitution. The principle of separation of powers obtains not through express provision but by actual division in our Constitution. The purpose is to prevent the concentration of authority in one person or group of persons that might lead to irreparable error or abuse in its exercise to the detriment of republican institutions. There is a violation of this principle when there is impermissible interference with and or assumption of another department's functions. I think na-discuss na natin sa pinaka-first video ng Poly-Rev yung separation of powers. May kanya-kanya silang ginagawa. Bawal i-encroach ng isang department yung functions ng isang department. So, for example, yung pagsusulat ng batas, legislative department yan. So, yung executive, hindi siya pwedeng mag-enact ng laws kasi trabaho yan ng Congress, ng legislative department. Yung executive naman, in charge of the implementation or execution of the laws. So, yung senators, for example, or mga congressmen, hindi sila yung nag-i-implement ng batas. Yung nag-i-implement ng batas is yung president. So, at the local level, yung mga mayor, governor, mga executive officials din sila. Executive department headed by the president. Tapos, meron siyang cabinet, pero yung cabinet niya, kasi yung ibang members ng executive, parang alter egos of the president lang. That's why, kapag may bagong elect na president, diba, nag-a-appoint, hindi election, ina-appoint, pumipili si president ng department secretaries. So, bakit niya ina-appoint? Kasi yung executive kanya, solo niya yung executive. So, nasa sa kanya kung sino yung gusto niyang kasama sa administration niya, yung mga people na may trust siya. Yung legislative naman, elected, syempre. Yung vice president, syempre executive din yan, elected din yan. Yung judicial department naman, appointed by the president, yes. Pero may process din yan. And kahit ina-appoint ng president yung members ng Supreme Court, meron pa ring independence. Kasi once na ma-appoint na ng president yung member ng Supreme Court, hindi mo masasabing kanya talaga yon kasi 15 sila doon nakaupo eh. Yung iba doon in-appoint din ng previous presidents. And once na ma-appoint na, hindi niya na pwedeng tanggalin. Yung sa executive department, kapag ina-appoint ng president yung mga department secretary niya, for example, or kung sino man dyan, pwede niyang tanggalin kung sino yung in-appoint niya. Pero yung appointments, hindi siya, although yung president yung pumipili, pero meron pa rin commission on appointments, merong mga officials na napaka-importante ng role na hindi pwede kung sino-sino lang yung i-appoint ng president. So, meron pa rin hand yung Congress dyan. Pero, we will discuss the departments isa-isa later. Basta, to give you an idea, ganun. Yung ginagawa ng Judicial Department naman, in-interpret niya yung batas. And may judicial power of review siya para sabihin na, for example, si President, grave abuse of discretion amounting to lack or excess of jurisdiction. Hindi mo, nag-exceed ka sa ginagawa mo or merong encroachment. So, parang ganyan. May separation, may iba-iba silang roles, may iba-iba silang powers, may iba-iba silang functions. While may separation of powers, hindi siya parang isolated. Merong blending of towers. Merong blending of powers na tinatawag. So, ano yung principle of blending of powers? Instances when powers are not confined exclusively within one department but are assigned to or shared by several departments. Bakit? Because it is necessary to properly address the complexities brought about by a rapidly developing society in which traditional branches of government have difficulty coping with. Kasi, although may 3 department, pero iisang gobyerno pa rin, 'di ba? So, dapat meron silang harmony. Kaya may blending of powers. So, merong separation, pero at the same time, merong blending. Example, yung president, siya yung nagpe-prepare ng budget. Kasi siya nakakaalam siya yung nag-i-implement, siya yung nag-execute. Pero, kahit siya yung mag-prepare ng budget, hindi siya pwedeng mag-decide kung magkano na siya lang. Magpe-prepare siya ng budget kasi siya nakakaalam, pero yung Congress yung magsusulat ng appropriation bill. So, yung budget, nasa kay Congress yan. Nasa legislative yung power of purse. So, Congress mag-enact ng appropriation bill pursuant dun sa budget na binigay ng President. So, parang nagtutulungan. Yung budget, hindi lang trabaho ng President, kailangan rin may participation ng Congress. Yang ganyan, example yan ng blending of powers. Another is if the president enters into and ratifies a treaty with foreign countries, yung Senate nagko-concur with the same. So, blending rin yan. The grant of amnesty by the president is subjected to the concurrence of a majority of all the members of Congress. Example din ng blending yan. Yung Judicial Department, paano yung blending dyan? Medyo parang nahihirapan ako mag-isip ng example on top of my head. Kasi yung judiciary kasi yun yung parang nagbabantay na tama yung interpretation ng batas, tama yung ginagawa ng executive and ng legislative. Siguro yung isang example is, for example, sa mga presidential electoral tribunal, tama ba presidential? PET, mga ganon. May mga committee kung saan members of the Supreme Court, yung iba sa kanila ex officio members sa committees na yung membership, merong members from the judiciary and merong members from the legislative. So, isang body sila, may mga ginagawa sila, pero they're working together. Yun siguro yung isang example ng parang blending na involved yung Judicial Department. Ano pa ba? Kung for example, merong act na sa tingin ng court, dapat punishable. Pero syempre, bawal judicial legislation. Kunwari merong krimen, hindi siya matatawag na krimen. Merong action na dapat crime siya, pero there's no law punishing it. So, alam naman natin na sa crime rev, diba? Kung walang batas na nagpapunish sa isang action, legal yan. Kahit gaano pa yan ka morally wrong para sa atin or kasama, as long as walang batas na nagsasabing krimen yan, walang magagawa yung courts. Hindi sila pa rin mag-pass ng judgment na ikulong or i-convict over something na walang law na nagpapunish sa action or omission na yan. Yung law, di ba, ginagawa ng Congress. So, yung ginagawa ng courts is pwede silang magsulat sa legislative recommendation na gawa ng batas to penalize an action or an omission. So, yun siguro yung parang isa ring example ng blending. Kumbaga kung saan nagtutulungan yung departments. Yun yung blending. So, checks and balances. This is a mechanism by which one department is allowed to resist encroachments upon its prerogatives or to rectify mistakes or excesses committed by the other departments. So, yung check and balance, meron yan. Parang chine-check ng bawat department yung ginagawa ng ibang department para ma-make sure na they stay in line. Na kung ano yung functions nila, yun lang, at hindi nila in-encroach yung functions ng ibang department. Usually, yung Supreme Court, yan yung na-mention ko nga kanina, di ba? Pwede niyang i-adjudge yung kahit batas. Papasa ng batas yung, gagawa ng batas yung legislative. I-approve ng president, right? Yun rin pala sa lawmaking, there's also blending of powers kasi yung lawmaking process, which is i-discuss natin kapag pinag-usapan na natin yung legislative department, may involvement yung president yun, pwede niya i-veto. So, gagawa ng batas yung legislative, i-approve ng president. So, magiging law na yan, diba? However, lahat ng batas na ginagawa ng legislative dapat nagko-conform sa Constitution. Kasi yun yung fundamental law of the land. So, kahit na may yung power sa paggawa ng batas na sa legislative with the involvement of the executive, pwedeng sabihin ni court, ni Judicial Department na, sorry, pero yung batas nyo unconstitutional. Meaning, hindi nagko-conform sa Constitution. Therefore, walang bisa yan. So, may power na ganun yung Supreme Court. Meron siyang power to check. So, to secure coordination in the workings of the various departments of the government, kailangan tong check and balance. Kahit dun sa example kung lawmaking process, na gagawa ng batas yung Congress tapos pwedeng i-approve or i-veto ng President, check and balance na rin yan in itself eh. Kasi, though yung power na gumawa ng batas sa Congress, pagtingin ng President hindi siya magandang law, pwede niyang i-stop para hindi maging law yung isang bill. Kasi pag ginagawa pa lang yung isang batas, bill pa lang yung status niya. Kapag may approval na ng President, magiging law na siya. Tapos, kapag law na, kahit law na yung status, meaning kailangang sundin, valid siya until mag-declare si Supreme Court na, oops, mali yan, unconstitutional yan. Parang ganun. Pero, don't worry, kasi sa Consti, i-discuss natin isa-isa. Like, I'll make a separate video for Legislative Department, for Executive Department, and for Judicial Department. So, mas madidiscuss natin exhaustively yung ginagawa ng bawat departments. The President may nullify a conviction made by a court in a criminal case by pardoning an offender. Yes, isa din pala yan. Merong power of pardon yung President na pagpapatawad kahit na kinonvict na, for example, ng court, pwedeng hindi mag-suffer ng criminal liability ang isang tao kapag pinardon siya ng President. What else? Madaming check and balance. Consent of Congress through the Commission on Appointments is necessary in the appointments of certain officers with the President. Congress may refuse to give its concurrence to an amnesty proclaimed by the President. Yung amnesty naman, parang pardon din, pero marami yan. So, kailangan ng concurrence ng Congress. Pag hindi pumayag si Congress, hindi ma-exercise ni President yung power niya ng amnesty. Senate may refuse to concur to a treaty that the President has concluded. Congress has the sole power to impeach the impeachable officer. So, yung Congress kapag sa impeachment, para siyang nagiging court. Bakit hindi yung Supreme Court yung impeachment court? Kasi kahit yung mga members ng Supreme Court, impeachable officers. Again, appointed sila ng President. Bawal silang tanggalin ng President, pero pwede silang ma-impeach. Congress may define, prescribe, and apportion the jurisdiction of the various courts, but may not deprive the Supreme Court of its jurisdiction over certain cases. In general, the judiciary has the power to declare invalid an act done by Congress. So, ito na yung diniscuss natin kanina na i-declare na unconstitutional. Or, tinatawag natin gad-allege grave abuse of discretion amounting to lack or excess of jurisdiction sa actions ng President, ng subordinates niya, and even members of constitutional commissions. When the judiciary mediates to allocate constitutional boundaries, it does not assert any superiority over other departments. Hindi sinasabing dahil pwedeng i-check ng judiciary, supreme siya sa dalawang departments. Tandaan natin na co-equal lahat yan. Yung tatlong yan, equal. Walang lamang. Hindi lamang yung president or yung executive. Hindi lamang yung Congress. Hindi lamang yung judiciary. Equal yung departments na yan. So, kung iisipin mo, sino yung pinaka-powerful na mga tao sa Pilipinas? Pwede nating sabing president, pero hindi. At technically, yung president, yung Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, yung Senate President, yung Speaker of the House, equal sila ng power kasi sila yung head ng departments nila and yung departments equal. Pero of course, sa Congress, although may Senate President and may Speaker of the House, yung Congress as a whole yan eh. Lower House, Upper House, isang buong body sila. Group sila, di ba? Yung judiciary, silang 15. Kahit may Chief Justice, pero silang 15. Collegiate. As a body sila, isang unit sila. Kaya siguro, ang dominant ng President, kasi yung President, yung executive power, nasa sa kanya lang, vested sa isang tao. Whereas sa legislative, sa Congress, marami silang members. Sa judiciary, marami rin silang members. Okay, so tuloy natin. Okay. So, test in determining whether a given power has been validly exercised by a particular department. The test applied is not necessarily or always the nature of the power. The first criterion is whether or not the power in question, regardless of its nature, has been constitutionally conferred upon the department claiming its exercise. Potestas delegata non delegari potest. What has been delegated cannot be further delegated. It is based upon the ethical principle that such delegated power constitutes not only a right but a duty to perform by to be performed by the delegate through the instrumentality of his own judgment and not through the intervening mind of another. A further delegation of such power, unless permitted by the sovereign power, would constitute of the trust reposed in the delegate mandated to discharge it directly. Basically, yan ang ibig sabihin. Yung ibig sabihin lang niyan is yung lawmaking power, for example, sa Congress. Binoto kasi ng mga tao yung representatives na yan para gumawa ng batas. Therefore, bawal ipasa ng Congress sa iba yung paggawa ng batas. Save for some exceptions. Like for example, yung mga sangguniang panlalawigan, sangguniang panlunsod, yun yung mga councilors na binoboto natin, city councilors, ganyan. Gumagawa sila ng batas. Sila yung gumagawa ng mga ordinance, 'di ba? Kaya may iba-ibang ordinance sa bawat city. Kasi alam nila kung ano yung needs ng constituents nila eh. Na-discuss na rin natin sa previous video yung decentralization, 'di ba? Para mas ma-manage yung affairs ng country. Kaso, may limitations 'yan. Bawal silang gumawa ng batas na parang taliwas or nag-exceed dun sa law na mismo. Bawal silang mag-contradict sa law, bawal silang mag-contradict sa constitution, pero dapat parang dun lang, hindi sila mag-exceed sa kinonfer sa kanila na power, if that makes sense. Yung isang example din is sa executive. Yung executive naman, yung mga departments, mapapansin nyo, merong mga implementing rules and regulations such as IRRs. Yun yung mga department orders, DO number ganito, ganyan. Yung DOLE, merong DO. Yung, ano pa yung ibang departments? DOH, merong DO. Meron silang mga department orders. Binding din naman to and kailangan nating sundin. Pero, filling in the details lang yan. Mas madidiscuss natin yan sa legislative department pag pinag-usapan na natin yan. Pero, ganun. Yung lawmaking power talagang vested kay Congress lang. Same rin sa President, yung implementation, yung executive power na sa President, diba? Pero meron siyang alter egos. Yung alter egos na, yung mga departments na yan, yun yung tumutulong sa kanyang mag-execute or mag-implement kasi hindi pwedeng lahat naman galing sa president. Pero yung actions nila dapat consistent sa will ng president kasi yung president, siya talaga yung may hawak ng executive power. Delegations to the people at large. This is permissible delegation by virtue of initiative and referendum of the people. Emergency powers of the president. In times of war, some other national emergency, the Congress may, by law, authorize the President for a limited period and subject to such restrictions as it may prescribe to exercise powers necessary and proper to carry out a declared national policy. Unless sooner withdrawn by resolution of the Congress, such powers shall cease upon the next adjournment thereof. Conferment of emergency powers on the President is not mandatory on the Congress. Mere emergency power itself cannot and should not create power. Mere declaration of a state of emergency does not require delegation from Congress. The exercise of emergency powers require delegation from Congress. So, napaka-important yung last kong sinabi kasi pansin ko sa mga law school exams, may mga questions talaga about this na yung problem is nag-declare si President ng state of emergency. So, valid ba yung declaration niya? Kailangan ba ng approval ng Congress? Parang ganon. Basta, tandaan lang natin na yung mere declaration, nag-declare lang ng state of emergency, hindi kailangan ng nagaling kay Congress. Pwedeng gawin ni President yan. Okay. Conditions for the vesture of emergency powers in the President. Ito yung requisites. Mas madidiscuss natin ito pag pinag-usapan na natin yung Executive Department, pero pasadahan lang natin ng konti. Existence of war or some other national emergency. Number 1. Number 2, delegation must be for a limited period only. Number 3, delegation must be subject to such restriction as the Congress may prescribe. And lastly, emergency powers must be exercised to carry out a national policy declared by the Congress. Okay, tariff powers of the President. The Congress may by law authorize the President to fix within specified limits and subject to such limitations and restrictions as it may impose tariff rates, import and export quotas, notes ko, tonnage and wharfage dues and other duties or imposts within the framework of the National Development Program of the government. The fixing of rates is legislative power, but it may be delegated to the President and he may exercise it directly. Flexible clause. The President is empowered to increase, reduce, or remove existing rates of import duty, including any necessary change in classification, but in no case shall the increased rate of import duty be higher than a maximum of 100% ad valorem. Establish import quotas or ban imports of any commodity as may be necessary, and impose an additional duty on all imports exceeding 10% ad valorem whenever necessary. So, requisites for the exercise of tariff powers of the President. Okay. Uulitin din natin to sa Executive Department pero ayun. In the interest of general welfare and national security dapat. And there is recommendation of NEDA. Except if the imposition of an additional duty does not exceed 10% ad valorem. Kung hindi naman nag-exceed ng 10% or saktong 10%, hindi na kailangan ng recommendation of NEDA. So, before any recommendation is submitted to the President by the NEDA, the Tariff Commission shall conduct an investigation. Public hearings by the Tariff Commission shall be held, wherein interested parties shall be afforded reasonable opportunity to be present, to produce evidence, and to be heard. And the report of the Tariff Commission shall be submitted to the NEDA within 30 days after the termination of the public hearings. So, for an increase, reduction, or removal of existing protective rates and the imposition of import quotas or bans, the effectivity of the order issued by the President shall be 30 days after its promulgation. For imposition of additional duty not exceeding 10% ad valorem, the order shall take effect at the time the President sees it fit at his discretion. So, quasi-legislative power, the authority delegated by the lawmaking body to an administrative body to adopt rules and regulations intended to carry out the provisions of a law and implement legislative policy. Ito yung sinasabi ko kaninang IRRs. So, ano yung mga examples of valid and invalid delegations? The power delegated to the Energy Regulatory Board or ERB to fix and impose a universal charge on electricity end users was challenged as an undue delegation of the power to tax. The court, however, rules that the delegating law was complete in itself and the amount to be charged was made certain by the parameters set by the law itself. So this is an example of a valid delegation. The standby authority granted to the President to increase the rate of VAT from 10% to 12% is not an undue delegation of legislative power to tax. There is but simply a delegation of ascertainment of facts, which enforcement and administration of the increased rate under the law is contingent. Congress does not abdicate its functions or unduly delegate power when it describes what job must be done, who must do it, and what is the scope of his authority. So, dapat complete in itself na yung law. Tapos mag-fill in lang ng details. So, this is a valid delegation. The authority given by LTFRB to provincial bus operators to set a fare range over and above the existing authorized fare, this is an invalid delegation. Bakit? Kasi, ba't niya pinasa sa provincial bus operators? Diba? Ano yung authority nila? Hindi naman allowed ng law yun. So, mali yung ginawa ni LTFRB dito. Section 68 of the Revised Administrative Code of 1917 authorizing the President to create municipalities through executive orders. Invalid delegation kasi yung gumagawa ng municipalities is sa province ng Congress. Officers are granted unlimited discretion in the distribution of properties arbitrarily taken. Hindi unlimited discretion yan. Invalid din yung delegation. Delegation to local government units. Ito yung pinag-uusapan natin kanina na mga sangguniang panlalawigan, sangguniang panlunsod. The legislation by local governments is not regarded as a transfer of general legislative power, but rather as a grant of authority to prescribe local regulations according to immemorial practice, subject of course to the interposition of the superior in cases of necessity. So again, hindi siya delegated siya pero hindi siya yung transfer ng plenary power or general legislative power of Congress. Kasi again, sa Congress lang yan. So, two-fold test for valid delegation. Pwedeng mag-delegate pero may limitations. Merong tests. So, yung dalawang test is the Completeness Test and the Sufficient Standard Test. Very important. So, valid yung delegation kapag complete siya in itself. Dapat ma-comply yung Completeness Test. The law must be complete in itself in all its essential terms and conditions when it leaves the legislature, so that there will be nothing left for the delegate to do when it reaches him except to enforce it. Sufficient standard test, it must fix a standard, the limits of which are sufficiently determinate or determinable, to which the delegate must conform in the performance of his function. So, kompleto and merong standards para alam ng executive, for example, na kung ano yung expected or ano yung gustong mangyari ng batas and ano yung roles and responsibilities nila. A delegation of legislative power which does not enunciate any policy to be carried out or implemented by the delegate, nor gives sufficient standard, is invalid. The court has recognized the following terms as indicating sufficient standards: dapat for public interest, justice, equity, public convenience, public welfare, simplicity, economy, and welfare. The use of the phrase, as it may see fit, is an extremely dangerous condition kasi parang binibigay mong discretion sa kung kanino mo dinedelegate. Dapat kasi kompleto na in itself. So, pag sinabing as it may see fit, binibigyan mo ng discretion. Hindi siya kompleto at the same time. Yung standard, dapat yung standards kasi, yung Congress na nag-set dun sa batas. Hindi mo ipapaubaya yung pag-set ng standards sa delegate. It is laden with perilous opportunities for partiality and abuse and even corruption. In that scenario, there is no longer limitations on the part of public officers kasi discretionary sa part niya. Their options become boundless, hence there arises a roving commission, a wide and sweeping authority that is not canalized within banks that keep it from overflowing. Therefore, it constitutes an arbitrary flexing of the governmental muscle, resulting in an invalid delegation of legislative powers. Without statutory declaration of policy, the delegate would in effect make or formulate such policy which is the essence of every law, and without the aforementioned standard, there would be no means to determine with reasonable certainty whether the delegate has acted within or beyond the scope of his authority. The MMDA's powers were limited to the formulation, coordination, regulation, implementation, preparation, management, monitoring, setting of policies, installing a system, and administration. Yun lang yung sinet na powers nila. Nothing in RA number 7924 granted MMDA police power, let alone legislative power. Therefore, MMDA cannot on its own dismantle, remove, or destroy billboards, signages, and other advertising media installed on the MRT3 structure by Trackwork. So, this is a case. So, kung ano lang yung nasa batas, bawal mag-exceed yung mga delegates. Sino yung pwedeng delegates? President, yung mga departments under him, di ba? Mga department heads under him, yung mga IRRs na yan, and local legislative, local, local government units, yung mga councilors nila, yung mga sanggunian nila. So, dinedelegate sa kanila, pero may limitations. Kailangan maipasa nila yung Completeness Test and yung Sufficient Standard Test. So, yun lang. That's it for, for separation of powers and delegation of powers. Yung next nating pag-uusapan is fundamental powers of the state. Ito yung police power, eminent domain, taxation. Itong tatlong to. So, separate video na lang yan kasi masyado siyang ibang topic. Ayun. Okay, see you in the next one.